Murray Watt, welcome to the program.
G'day, David.
So are you willing to be more specific about when the Minister of the Day can use this national interest power to approve a project that's damaging to the environment?
Well, what we're seeking to do here, David, is to achieve a balanced package of reforms that do deliver real gains for the environment and for business. It's 5 years to the week that Graham Samuel released his blueprint outlining that sort of balanced package, and that's what we're delivering. So I'm open to hearing from all sorts of parties about what sort of changes they would require in order to support this bill. You know, at the end of the day, what I want to make sure of is that the package of reforms that we do pass through the Parliament, and I'm very confident that we will, do achieve that balance. If that requires some tweaks here or there, then I'm obviously open to hearing from people, but that's the overarching goal that we're seeking.
Well, your colleague Madeleine King, the Resources Minister, says the Minister could use this power to approve a rare earths mine. Is that right?
Well, the way the legislation is designed, and again, like most of this legislation, it very faithfully repeats the recommendations from Graham Samuel's review. He was on the ABC himself on Friday saying that this bill very much replicates his recommendations. He recommended that in rare instances, a minister should have the ability to approve a project even if it doesn't meet the usual environmental standards in the national interest. Now, what the legislation does is point to things like defence and security projects. In theory, it could be used to approve a critical minerals mine if that was deemed by the minister to be in the national interest, but that would be after a full environmental assessment. The requirement of the legislation is that that project be limited in every way possible to avoid breaching those national standards. But ultimately, as Graham Samuel said, we believe that a minister in an elected government should, in rare circumstances, have the ability to approve a project that is in the national interest.
So that's a yes. If an environmental approval says, look, this rare earths mine and the processing of the minerals is going to be so damaging to the environment, it should not go ahead, the minister can still step in and say, this rare earths mine or processing is in the national interest, it will go ahead despite that damage?
Well, that will be obviously up to the Minister of the Day, and it will require a full environmental assessment for that particular project. I can't sort of say that every single critical minerals mine will get a tick, because of course the presumption is that the national environmental standards would be applied. But yes, under the legislation, if the Minister of the Day decided that that particular project was in the national interest and a full environmental assessment had occurred to minimise those environmental impacts, if it was still in the national interest to proceed, then the Minister would have the ability to approve that.
What about a gas project?
Well, again, the legislation doesn't specify the types of projects that it can't be used for. Just to give you some perspective here, Dave.
So it could be a gas project?
Well, again, what the legislation points to is projects that relate to defence and security or national emergencies.
And this is the point, it's pretty broad. The criticism is it's too broad, you're not willing to put any more clarity around that. So in theory, it could include anything.
Well, and again, I'm open to hearing from people about what they think should be tweaked with this legislation in order to pass it. But as I was saying, David, just to give you some perspective, the current legislation that we're seeking to reform has the ability for a minister to grant a national interest exemption from the Act, which is an exemption from the entire Act, much further than the approval we're talking about. That's been used around 27 times so far. 17 of them have been for natural disasters or to help regenerate species that are at risk of extinction. So they're the kind of things that it's typically used for, and I think they're a pretty good guide.
You also want to speed up decisions by making it very clear from the outset when a project can't go ahead if it's got an unacceptable impact. But again, there's a concern, there's not much clarity here. What is an unacceptable impact that would stop a project in its tracks?
Well, I guess I would argue, David, that there's much more clarity included in the reforms that we're putting forward than exist under the current legislation. Under the current legislation, a minister can knock back a project if it's going to be clearly unacceptable, but there's no definition of what that means in the current legislation. What we're seeking to do through these reforms is actually provide a definition of what would be considered an unacceptable impact on the environment and would therefore get a no. And the sorts of things that we're talking about in that definition definition are, for example, if something was going to seriously impair or have irreplaceable damage to a particular environmental matter. And some of the examples I've given have been if, perish the thought, someone wanted to mine Uluru, drill on the Great Barrier Reef, drive a species to extinction. I think most Australians would say that that kind of project shouldn't proceed.
So, I mean, mining Uluru sounds pretty extreme, but on driving a species to extinction. So if something was going to, for example, wipe out the Maugean skate in Tasmania, that would be unacceptable.
If there was conclusive evidence that a particular project was going to drive a species to extinction, then without wanting to prejudge a future decision, I think it's likely that a minister would knock that back. Of course, with the Maugean skate, we are undertaking a lot of work to regenerate that species, oxygenation of the water there, captive breeding programs, which are actually starting to see that species recover a bit. But yeah, I mean, if a particular project is going to drive a species to extinction or have an irreplaceable impact on it or a particular environment, then it would be likely to get a no. And I might say, David, this also, obviously there's an environmental benefit there, but it also responds to the request from business that they want quick yeses and quick nos. This is a way that business can get a quick no and understand that they really shouldn't bother putting up a project and racking up the millions of dollars in costs because it's very likely going to be a no.
It might be faster, but is any environmental damage going to be prevented under this new law than that is currently not prevented under the current law?
Absolutely. The laws that we're putting forward contain a range of measures that shift the dial in favour of preserving nature forevermore. So, for example, for the first time, we'll have national environmental standards that will set out clear criteria for decision makers to use when they're determining environmental impacts. We're reforming environmental offsets, which everyone regards as a bit of a joke at the moment, to require for the first time in law that a proponent would need to avoid or mitigate or minimise the environmental impact of a project before offsetting it. And if they do turn to offsets, then they've got to deliver a net gain for the environment. So that's part of what Graham Samuel was talking about, that we shouldn't just be managing the decline of the environment, we should actually be seeking to restore the environment as well. So much bigger penalties for those who breach our environmental laws and engage in illegal clearing and that kind of thing. So a number of things that will lead to an improvement for nature, not just see it ongoing decline.
Part of your effort to speed up the whole decision-making process is you want to end the overlap of federal and state approvals. What would this mean for a decision on whether, for example, to approve development of Australia's largest untapped gas reserve, the Browse Basin off Western Australia? Who would make that decision?
So I'll come to the specific example in a minute, David, but as I say, just to explain that, one of the big barriers we've got to developments happening, whether it be housing, renewables, other projects at the moment, is that proponents need to go through both a state assessment and approval and a federal assessment and approval, and that can add years to the whole process. So one of the ways that we want to overcome that is by entering into agreements with a state which would allow them to do the assessment not just on their own behalf against their own laws, but also against our laws, but with those really tight safeguards, such as that the decision needs to meet our national standards. The processes that a state government has in place would need to be accredited and audited by the federal government to prevent a state going rogue. So there are those safeguards in place. When it comes to the Browse project specifically, that would not be able to proceed through a bilateral agreement because it's already determined to be a controlled action. That project was lodged years ago with the federal government. It reached the stage of being decided to be what's known as a controlled action, meaning that it requires a full EPBC assessment. So because it's a project that's effectively in the system now, it would continue to be assessed under the current laws. Okay. The change would be for future projects.
Bottom line, is there anything in this new legislation to stop a coal or a gas project going ahead?
Not in its own right. What we haven't taken the approach of saying that particular projects are altogether banned. Every project will be assessed on its merits, whether it be a coal and gas project, whether it be a housing and renewable project. They've all got to demonstrate that they're not having a significant impact on one of the 9 matters of national environmental significance under the Act.
But for coal and gas, for fossil fuel projects, does the new law make it any harder to get an approval?
I wouldn't say that it alters the sort of whether a project can or can't go ahead. As I say, what it does is put together criteria that need to be used when deciding whether the project goes ahead. If a coal or gas mine was to be, a coal or gas development was seeking approval, then it would need to meet the national environmental standards. It would need to avoid and minimise its environmental impacts and offset them to achieve a net gain. So they would be improvements compared to the criteria that apply to a project at the moment. If it was considered to have an unacceptable impact on the environment, then it would get knocked back, as would a housing development or a renewable project. So we're not trying to sort of put in particular criteria for particular sectors. What we're trying to do is put in a balanced package for all sorts of projects, for all industries that deliver environmental and business gains.
The bill doesn't put an end to native forest logging either. Do you want native forest logging to continue?
Well, our government doesn't have a policy of ending native forestry in the way that the Greens Party is seeking. What we have said, though, is that we will follow the recommendation from Graham Samuel to apply national environmental standards to the regional forestry agreements that are used for native forestry. So what that means in practice is that native forestry would need to meet higher environmental standards than are currently required under the legislation. That's a big step forward in terms of the environmental management of native forestry, but it doesn't go as far as what the Greens Party is seeking in being an all-out ban.
So native forest logging at the end of the day could continue. How's that going to help the environment?
Well, it could continue, but only if it meets those new national environmental standards, and that's something that's not required at the moment. The RFAs that native forestry occurs under at the moment follow environmental standards that are typically set by state governments. I think most observers would agree that they're probably not as strong as the national environmental standards that we're looking to introduce will be. So that would lift the requirements when it comes to environmental management, and I think that'd have a positive outcome for threatened species.
But leaving them unlogged would be a better outcome for the environment, wouldn't it?
Some would argue that, David.
What do you think? You're the minister.
Yeah, but I mean, as I say, we're not arguing for an all-out ban on native forestry. I mean, leaving aside the jobs and the economic potential, matters involving native forestry. Also, there are a range of products that Australians depend upon that rely on native forestry. So we're not going as far as banning it altogether, but we do want to see a much stronger environmental outcome than what we see at the moment.
So you need either the Greens or the Coalition to pass this. You want to get it done by the end of the year. I'm not sure how likely that's looking, but let me ask you what ground you're willing to give. Are you willing to drop plans for an EPA altogether to win the Coalition support?
We wouldn't be prepared to go that far, David. I suspect with your list of questions that is no doubt coming at me, I'll be mostly saying I'm not ruling things in or out, but there's no way that Labor will drop the creation of a new EPA. That is something that we've taken to 2 elections explicitly and has been endorsed by the Australian people. So we think it's a really important measure to really lift the compliance and enforcement of nature in Australia. I think it will be a real legacy for the Albanese government in the same way that saving Kakadu, stopping mining on Antarctica was for the Hawke government as well.
What about the Coalition demand, though, that the minister should be able to sack the boss of the EPA?
Look, I mean, as I say, we haven't sort of made final decisions about where we're prepared to go. I mean, I do think that it is important that a national EPA has a high degree of independence from the government of the day. That's why, for example, we've specified that when it comes to who they prosecute, who they investigate, what sort of fines they dish out for environmental damage, that should be independent of ministers. We don't allow ministers to tell the DPP who they can prosecute for murder or assault. We leave that to an independent DPP, and it's a similar principle.
It sounds like a bit more room, though, on that one. And on the Greens, you've said absolutely no to a climate trigger, which they've been asking for. But are you willing to shift on the issue of native forest logging?
Well, as I say, David, we're open, well, not just open, we've committed to apply the national environmental standards to our regional forestry agreements.
But we haven't seen those standards. We won't see those until after the law has passed, will we?
Actually, 2 of the standards, being the 2 that stakeholders most wanted to see around matters of national environmental significance and offsets, we expect to be producing them in the next few days for people to see. The intention is not to develop a standard for native forestry, but to apply the standards as a whole to native forestry. And frankly, I haven't heard a single stakeholder who wants a particular standard for native forestry. So So some of those standards will be coming in the next couple of days, even though they can't be created until after this bill is passed. But yeah, there's room to move on native forestry insofar as we have said that we'll apply those standards to the RFAs.
Let me move to the news of the day around the Nationals expecting to drop formally their commitment to a net zero target by 2050 and instead say Australia should lower emissions in line with the rest of the world. What do you think about this? Are you concerned that this could further shift public opinion when it comes to the net zero target?
I just think that yet again we're seeing the tail wagging the dog in the coalition. We've got the National Party, which didn't even rake 4% of the vote in the last federal election, dictating terms to the Liberal Party, who claim to be the majority party in a coalition. It's a repeat of what we saw with nuclear, David, where the National Party went out first to drag the Liberal Party into supporting nuclear, only to be resoundingly rejected by the Australian people at the last election. I mean, the idea that you would hand over climate and energy policy to the likes of Matt Canavan and the ghost of Barnaby Joyce is like handing Dracula the keys to the blood bank. Half the National Party don't believe in climate change. The other half just want to wish it away. What they are doing in dragging the Liberal Party to this position is getting in the way of the incredible economic opportunity that transitioning to net zero provides. So it's a real test for the Liberal Party about whether they're going to continue being dictated to by a junior partner in their coalition who doesn't believe in climate change, or whether they're going to get with the rest of the world and take the economic opportunities that transition involves.
Minister, there are difficulties in the transition, as you know, and this week the coalition's been pointing to Tomago, the aluminium smelter threatening to close down, the inflation figures driven by an energy price. Prices are still going up for our power bills. What do you say to those who say, why should Australia be moving faster than the rest of the world on cutting emissions?
What I can say is that any credible economist can show you that the longer we take to get to net zero and the more we delay, the higher the cost will be. And that's why we are so committed to pursuing this transition and getting on with it. I mean, to take the Tomago example this week, that is a tragedy that over 1,000 workers are potentially at risk of losing their jobs. What the owners of Tomago have said is that the reason they're looking at potentially closing that is because they can't get access to the cheap renewable power that they need. The same company owns a smelter in Gladstone. That is not at risk of closing because they've been able to access the cheaper renewable power that they need. They can't get it for Tomago. So there's an example just this week that shows we need more renewable energy, not less. And of course, that's one of the things we're seeking to achieve through those EPBC reforms as well.
Finally, Minister, the Bureau of Meteorology, their website update didn't go down well this week. You called on them to fix it. It sounds like they have made some changes. I think it's more than $80 million spent on this website upgrade. Is that taxpayers' money well spent?
Look, I think it is really important that taxpayers and all Australians have access to reliable information from what is a great Australian institution in the Bureau of Meteorology. I did have a meeting with the acting CEO of the BOM this week, and I made the point that I didn't think that the new website was meeting users' expectations. So I was really pleased to see that on Friday they began making some changes, in particular going back to the previous default view on the radar, which enables people to see hail and things like that. That proved very useful here in southeast Queensland yesterday when we had another severe thunderstorm, and it provided people with that information. But I'm very pleased that the BOM has listened to community feedback. I know they've got plans to make more changes. That's what we want, but we also want a really credible, reliable service as well.
Environment Minister Murray Watt, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, David.